He was silent, ruthless, and invisible. From Glasgow's grim streets to the ports of South America, Jamie the Iceman Stevenson built a £100 million drug empire hidden behind fruit crates and encrypted phones. For years, he slipped through police hands until a single banana shipment unraveled everything. This is the true story of the UK's most calculating drug lord and the global hunt to bring him down. And before we begin, please support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. Thank you. Jamie Stevenson, born and raised in Glasgow, emerged from the city's gritty underbelly with a quiet ferocity that would eventually earn him a reputation as one of Scotland's most feared gangland figures. Little is publicly known about his early years, but those familiar with the streets of Glasgow in the 1990s knew his name long before the headlines did. Tied closely to the feared McGovern clan, he built his credentials not through loud bravado, but calculated violence. His rise was marked not by wild chaos, but chilling precision. Hence the nickname he would carry for decades: the Iceman. By the late 1990s, Stevenson was operating in the orbit of some of Glasgow's most violent enforcers. The McGoverns controlled turf in Springburn and Royston Hill, and Jamie acted as one of their most trusted foot soldiers. His business? Enforcing debts, moving drugs, and meting out punishment with surgical cruelty. According to police and former associates, Stevenson's ability to stay composed under pressure set him apart from his peers. He was known to shoot or stab rivals without hesitation, always methodical, never messy. His criminal trajectory was cemented when he began branching out from mere enforcement. At the turn of the millennium, Glasgow was awash with drugs, especially heroin and crack cocaine, and Stevenson saw opportunity. He began managing logistics, expanding into trafficking routes that moved product from mainland Europe into the UK via coastal entry points. As his responsibilities grew, so did his ambitions. By the early 2000s, Stevenson had become more than a street-level enforcer. He was now a lieutenant in a broader network, overseeing drug shipments and money laundering operations with the same cold efficiency he once applied to knife fights in alleyways. His ability to remain quiet, keep a low profile, and avoid flashiness only added to his mystique. Police intelligence reports began to tag him as one to watch, linking his name to increasingly high-level narcotics seizures. The real turning point, however, would come with his eventual break from the McGovern clan. That chapter, marked by betrayal, bloodshed, and a dramatic shift in Glasgow's underworld power structure, would transform Stevenson from a soldier into a general. But even before that, Jamie Stevenson was already being whispered about in hushed tones. A man whose hands were always clean, but whose eyes had seen and done too much. The McGovern clan was once the most dominant crime family in Glasgow, and Jamie Stevenson had been their silent enforcer, their dependable ice-cold hand in the dark. But the very attributes that made him indispensable, his quiet intellect, his meticulous nature, and his appetite for control, also made him a threat. As the McGoverns began to fragment under internal pressure and external heat from law enforcement, Stevenson saw the opportunity to break free. What followed was not just a split, it was a calculated takeover. One pivotal moment came in 2000 when Tony McGovern, one of the clan's leading figures, was shot dead outside the New Morven Bar in Glasgow's Springburn area. The killing shocked the underworld, but it also served as a silent signal. Power was shifting. Though Stevenson was never charged in connection with the murder, whispers in Glasgow's gangland circles suggested it was the final move in a long-running internal power play. Following McGovern's death, Stevenson began quietly consolidating influence. No dramatic turf wars, no gangland executions on street corners, just a slow erosion of loyalty to the old regime. He gained control of lucrative drug importation routes and began building his own network, one that would span from South America to Europe. He retained a low profile, rarely appearing in public and living modestly, in stark contrast to the flashy lifestyle of his predecessors. Those who knew him said he operated like a corporate executive, strategic, invisible, ruthless. By 2005, Stevenson had secured a seat at the top table of organized crime in Scotland. He ran operations through proxies and layers of trusted lieutenants using legitimate businesses as fronts. The police began referring to him as a serious and organized crime figure, and intelligence reports showed his increasing interest in large-scale cocaine distribution. Yet, Stevenson never let emotion cloud his business. Associates described him as calm under fire, even in the most high-stakes situations. When one attempt was made on his life outside a Glasgow cafe, he emerged unscathed, and the assailant vanished soon after. Few doubted that Stevenson had retaliated, quietly, efficiently, permanently. By the late 2000s, Stevenson's operation was estimated to be worth tens of millions of pounds. He'd moved from the streets of Springburn to the sun-soaked logistics hubs of Spain and the Netherlands. But while his business model had evolved, his methods remained unchanged: tight control, disciplined operations, and no mercy for disloyalty. The Iceman had arrived, not as a gangster in the traditional sense, but as an architect of a criminal empire built on global logistics, encrypted communications, and the brutal certainty of silence. In 2007, after years of covert surveillance, law enforcement finally made their move on Jamie Stevenson. Despite his cautious operations and layers of separation, investigators from the Scottish Crime and Drug Enforcement Agency had been tracking the Iceman's financial activities. The case against him didn't begin with drugs or violence, it started with money. Police targeted Stevenson for money laundering, believing that tracing the profits of his criminal enterprise would be more feasible than tying him directly to drug shipments. Over time, they built a financial case based on movement of funds, suspicious property deals, and unaccounted wealth. A key piece of evidence was a £300,000 home registered in the name of a relative, despite Stevenson having no declared income. He was arrested and charged with laundering over £1 million, suspected proceeds of crime linked to the international cocaine trade. In court, the prosecution painted him as the hidden hand behind a vast operation that moved drugs into the UK and laundered the profits through a network of associates and shell businesses. Surveillance had captured meetings, phone records, and financial trails, all pointing back to Stevenson. In 2007, he was convicted and sentenced to a significant prison term, initially reported as 12 years. This marked a rare legal success against a figure who had, until then, remained almost mythological in Glasgow's criminal landscape. Yet, even behind bars, Stevenson retained his influence. According to reports, he continued to exert control over his organization through intermediaries, maintaining discipline and overseeing transactions. During his incarceration, law enforcement agencies intensified efforts to dismantle his network, but many operations continued unabated, aided by encrypted phones, loyal runners, and a strict code of silence. Stevenson's reputation only grew. To many in the underworld, he had become untouchable, a man who took his punishment without complaint, never turned informant, and would return. In 2014, after serving around 7 years, Stevenson was quietly released. His exit from prison wasn't met with fanfare, but it marked the beginning of a new phase. Older, more cautious, but no less dangerous, Stevenson was now ready to rebuild and expand his empire. And this time, he wasn't just looking at Scotland, he was looking at Europe. Upon his release in 2014, Jamie Stevenson returned to a world where the drug trade had evolved, and he adapted swiftly. No longer operating solely within the confines of Glasgow's underworld, Stevenson turned his attention to international logistics, focusing on streamlining supply chains that connected South America to Europe. With the rise of encrypted communications and increasingly globalized narcotics routes, he saw an opportunity to scale his empire like never before. He relocated between Spain and the United Arab Emirates, maintaining a presence in both countries while coordinating shipments through trusted intermediaries. Spain, with its major ports and established smuggling corridors, became central to his operation. Police intelligence later linked him to Colombian producers and Spanish distributors, confirming suspicions that Stevenson was no longer merely importing cocaine. He was orchestrating it from the source. Investigators in Europe began connecting the dots. Stevenson's fingerprints weren't on the packages, but his digital footprint, carefully encrypted and often routed through multiple layers, began to surface thanks to breakthroughs in communication intercepts. He was suspected of being behind shipments worth tens of millions of pounds, most of which entered the UK through container ports and secondary routes via the Netherlands and Belgium. Despite his international operations, Stevenson remained closely connected to Scotland. Associates continued to operate under his direction, facilitating street-level distribution and laundering profits. His lieutenants managed drug couriers, safe houses, and stash points from Glasgow to Dundee. Meanwhile, Stevenson, operating at a corporate level, ensured the product kept moving and the cash kept flowing. By 2019, UK authorities believed Stevenson had amassed more than £100 million in criminal wealth. His name began appearing in cross-border investigations involving Europol, Spanish Guardia Civil, and the UK's National Crime Agency. Each bust brought them closer to the heart of the network. In one case, authorities in Spain seized over a ton of cocaine stashed inside fruit shipments, an early sign of a strategy that would later define Stevenson's downfall. Yet, for all the pressure from law enforcement, Stevenson remained composed. He avoided surveillance, traveled under false names, and rarely communicated directly. His associates described him as cold, focused, and utterly pragmatic. He viewed criminal enterprise not as chaos, but as logistics, a supply chain with risks to be mitigated and revenue to be maximized. By the end of the decade, Stevenson had become more than a Scottish gangster. He was a transnational trafficker, a fixer between suppliers in Latin America and wholesalers in Europe. And as he prepared his most audacious smuggling plot yet, law enforcement on both sides of the continent closed in. In 2020, Jamie Stevenson escalated his operation to industrial scale, masterminding a smuggling scheme that would span oceans and continents. The plan was deceptively simple: hide massive quantities of cocaine within shipments of bananas, a commodity so common it rarely drew suspicion. But behind the simplicity lay a complex network of ports, intermediaries, and encrypted communications, all orchestrated with military precision. At the heart of the operation was David Bilsland, a 54-year-old fruit importer from Lanarkshire. The two men met in Spain, where Bilsland had become embedded in Stevenson's network. His legitimate produce business gave them the perfect front. Shipments would be loaded in Ecuador, one of the world's largest banana exporters, and arrive in the UK via Spain, often routed through the port of Dover. The operation ran smoothly at first. Using encrypted EncroChat devices, Stevenson coordinated the movement of drugs while remaining invisible to authorities. However, in 2020, European police managed to infiltrate EncroChat, exposing a treasure trove of criminal communications. Forensic teams decrypted thousands of messages, revealing Stevenson's involvement in directing shipments and laundering cash. One intercepted shipment alone contained £28 million worth of cocaine concealed in banana boxes. It was seized at Dover, where border agents, tipped off by EncroChat data, unloaded pallets and discovered the drugs stashed deep within the cargo. The bust was one of the largest of its kind and triggered a wave of arrests across the UK and Europe. Stevenson, however, was cautious. By the time the EncroChat network was exposed, he had already fled. His communications ceased and investigators struggled to trace his movements. Yet behind the scenes, they continued to piece together the evidence. Surveillance, financial records, and witness statements painted a damning picture. Stevenson had used fruit imports as a cover for trafficking thousands of kilos of cocaine across borders. Further evidence emerged from encrypted phones recovered during raids. Stevenson's handle on EncroChat, Iceman, matched the codename used in messages detailing drop-offs, pick-up points, and payment instructions. He had managed every element of the operation, from South American sourcing to final distribution in UK cities. It was this meticulous control that ultimately doomed him. With law enforcement agencies across Europe collaborating under Operation Venetic, Stevenson's once bulletproof supply chain crumbled. Arrests followed in Scotland, Spain, and the Netherlands. Bilsland was convicted, and authorities began publicly naming Stevenson as the elusive figure at the top of the pyramid. Still at large, Stevenson was now Europe's most wanted drug trafficker. His empire, valued at over £100 million, was under siege. But even as investigators closed in, he had one more play to make and one more factory to run. While authorities pursued the remnants of Jamie Stevenson's banana-based cocaine ring, they stumbled upon another facet of his empire, one rooted not in the ports of Dover, but in a quiet industrial unit in Kent. Here, Stevenson's network operated what police would later describe as the UK's largest ever illicit street Valium factory. The drug in question was etizolum, a potent sedative similar to diazepam, commonly used on the black market and often referred to as street Valium. Though banned in the UK, its popularity among users had surged due to its powerful calming effects and low cost. Stevenson's crew saw the gap in the market and filled it at scale. The factory, located in a nondescript warehouse, was run with clinical efficiency. It produced more than 2 million etizolum tablets every day, many stamped with the MSJ logo to imitate genuine prescription medication. Workers operated in shifts, pressing pills, packaging them, and preparing them for distribution across the UK. The pills were dyed in signature light blue and moved quickly through Scotland, England, and Northern Ireland. The scale was staggering. When police raided the Kent site in 2020, they seized approximately 60 million tablets, an estimated £1.6 million haul on the street. Alongside the drugs, they found industrial pill presses, packaging materials, and shipping records linking the operation to addresses in Glasgow and beyond. EncroChat messages tied Stevenson directly to the Kent operation. His digital alias, Iceman, was seen discussing quantities, delivery routes, and payments for the pill business. He was careful never to refer to drugs explicitly, instead using coded language, but the scale of production and his role in directing it were unmistakable. What shocked investigators most was the calculated diversification of Stevenson's enterprise. While other traffickers focused solely on Class A drugs like cocaine and heroin, Stevenson had built a multi-tiered narcotics empire that spanned stimulants, depressants, and synthetic drugs. The etizolum factory was a pharmaceutical production line, illegal but managed with the discipline of a legal business. After the raid, further arrests followed. Several individuals linked to the factory were charged, and police traced shipments to addresses across the UK and Ireland. Yet again, Jamie Stevenson himself remained one step ahead, nowhere to be found. By 2021, law enforcement agencies had now tied Stevenson to at least two major operations: the South American cocaine pipeline and the etizolum manufacturing ring. Together, they represented one of the most significant drug conspiracies in recent British history. But while his empire crumbled, the Iceman had already vanished, leaving investigators with nothing but encrypted messages and a growing trail of destruction. As the scope of Jamie Stevenson's criminal enterprise became clearer, so did the urgency to bring him to justice. By late 2021, he had become one of Europe's most wanted fugitives. Scotland's most powerful crime lord was no longer operating from the shadows. He had vanished entirely. After the EncroChat takedown and the raids on his drug factories, authorities had enough to charge him, but no idea where he was. Stevenson had disappeared. In November 2021, a breakthrough came when police raided the Sherbrooke Castle Hotel in Glasgow. Stevenson was arrested at the luxury venue under suspicion of heading the £100 million criminal network. But within days, he was granted bail, a decision that stunned investigators given the scope of his alleged crimes and his international links. Unsurprisingly, Stevenson fled almost immediately. He disappeared across the English Channel and surfaced in the Netherlands, slipping through the cracks of European law enforcement. Despite efforts by British and Dutch authorities to track him, Stevenson left behind nothing but a trail of encrypted communications and a single, crucial mistake. He abandoned an EncroChat device. The device, left behind in his Glasgow safe house, became a digital map of his final days in the UK. It contained messages tying him to both the banana smuggling and the Valium factory. Combined with surveillance, border records, and witness statements, investigators now had a clear picture of where he had gone and who had helped him. The National Crime Agency, NCA, Police Scotland, and Dutch authorities launched a joint manhunt. Europol placed him on their most wanted list, issuing an international alert. In February 2022, Stevenson was finally located and arrested in the Netherlands. He offered no resistance. After months on the run, the Iceman was in custody. His arrest marked the end of a global chase, but the beginning of a legal reckoning. He was extradited to Scotland under tight security and held in remand awaiting trial. His reappearance made headlines. One of the UK's most elusive crime bosses, finally caught silent as ever, showing no emotion. Stevenson's time as a ghost was over. For more than 2 decades, he had built a criminal empire spanning continents, dodged bullets and convictions, and eluded law enforcement. But now, every encrypted message, every shipment, every laundering trail pointed in one direction. And the courts were ready. In October 2024, Jamie Stevenson stood before the High Court in Glasgow, facing a suite of charges that spanned continents and years. The man once whispered about in gangland pubs and pursued by Interpol now faced the judgment of a jury. It was a quiet, clinical process, just as Stevenson himself had always been, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. He was charged with directing a criminal organization responsible for importing tons of cocaine into the UK, producing millions of illicit pills and laundering tens of millions of pounds. The Crown's case was built largely on EncroChat messages, surveillance records, and testimony from co-conspirators. Prosecutors highlighted Stevenson's role as the controlling mind behind both the banana shipment scheme and the Valium production operation in Kent. Stevenson, now 57, pled guilty to 2 major charges: involvement in the importation of cocaine worth £28 million and the industrial-scale production of etazolum. In doing so, he avoided a protracted trial, but not the inevitable judgment. Lord Beckett, presiding over the court, handed down a combined sentence of 20 years, 12 for the cocaine importation and 8 for the Valium conspiracy. "Your offending," said Lord Beckett, "was committed with the sophistication and planning of an international cartel. The public must be protected from criminals of your nature." Outside the court, officials from the National Crime Agency hailed the conviction as a major blow to organized crime in the UK. Officers described Stevenson as one of the most dangerous and influential figures they had ever pursued, silent, strategic, and utterly committed to staying invisible. Police Scotland, the NCA, and Metropolitan Police had worked together under Operation Venetic for years to dismantle Stevenson's empire. They described his network as sprawling, decentralized, and unusually disciplined for a UK-based gang. The banana shipments were just one node in a web that touched South America, mainland Europe, and every major UK city. While Stevenson's courtroom demeanor was mostly expressionless, he did briefly nod as the sentence was read. There were no family members present, no supporters, no words, just the cold finality of a 2-decade prison term. Even in defeat, the Iceman remained true to form, silent, composed, unreadable. In early 2025, Jamie Stevenson was back in the spotlight, this time in Edinburgh's appeal court. His legal team, led by senior advocate Thomas Ross, KC, argued that the original 20-year sentence handed down in Glasgow was excessive. While Stevenson had admitted to serious crimes, the defense insisted that the court had failed to account for mitigating factors, including his guilty plea and cooperation in clarifying evidence. The case was heard by Lord Carloway, Scotland's most senior judge, alongside Lords Pentland and Matthews. The atmosphere in court was markedly different from the somber tone of Stevenson's sentencing. Ross argued that Stevenson, though undeniably at the center of an international drug conspiracy, had not contested his charges and had accepted responsibility early, thereby saving the court significant time and resources. The Crown, represented by James Mulgrew KC, pushed back, stating that the scale of Stevenson's enterprise and its consequences warranted the original sentence. He reminded the court of the staggering reach of Stevenson's network, from cocaine smuggled in bananas from Ecuador to the Valium factory, pumping millions of tablets into vulnerable communities. The social harm, he argued, had been vast. Despite the Crown's objections, the appeal court ruled partially in Stevenson's favor. In February 2025, his sentence was officially reduced by nearly 4 years. The new term, 16 years and 3 months. Lord Carloway stated that while Stevenson's crimes were serious and systemic, the sentence should reflect the legal principles of parity and proportionality. Outside the court, Stevenson made headlines once more, this time for the image that accompanied his departure. Smiling and raising a thumb to waiting photographers, he appeared defiant, even triumphant. The gesture sparked public outrage. To victims of drug-related harm and anti-crime campaigners, it was a chilling reminder that the man known as the Iceman remained cold to the consequences of his empire. But even with the reduced sentence, Stevenson is expected to serve most of his term behind bars due to the seriousness of his offenses. His network has been largely dismantled, his assets seized, and his closest associates jailed. And yet, his legend, fueled by decades of silence, calculation, and fear, still looms over Scotland's criminal history. Whether or not Stevenson will ever walk free again is uncertain. But one thing is clear, his name is now etched permanently into the annals of Britain's most notorious crime lords.